If there's one theme that runs throughout every incarnation of Marvel's X-Men, it's that of change. Homo sapiens evolving into Homo superior. Heroes turning towards villainy, villains becoming heroes, full-bodied costumes turning into half-shirts. And perhaps most importantly, a team that establishes a headquarters and leaves for another, returns to the original, and so on and so forth. In fact, if there's anything that switches up more often than the X-Men's dynamic lineup, it's where the team, or teams, plural, actually hang out and spend their afternoons. So let's look back at all the places the X-Men have called home. This is Marvel Recap, X-Men Headquarters, with a special shout out to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe research team for their help. X Mansion, Westchester, New York. First time. Of course, the most famous X-Men base / training facility / children's school is the mansion of powerful psychic, mutant rights advocate Charles Francis Xavier. It was here that the Xavier family's current history with mutants truly began. The famous neoclassical mansion located in Salem Center, New York, in Westchester, was built on Xavier's ancestor, Charles Graymalkin's estate, which itself was eventually inherited by Professor Xavier's father, Brian Xavier. In fact, Charles was born in the mansion, which helps explain why he'd keep rebuilding the place in the same spot it gets destroyed, but we'll get to that in a moment. The X-Mansion, as we know it now, debuted in X-Men #1, all the way back in 1963. With the explosion of mutants across the world since the Atomic Age, and the ensuing fear and discrimination it brought, Charles, secretly a mutant himself, dedicated his life to training mutants to safely use their powers for the benefit of humanity. He decided to convert his mansion into an educational center for teens who were also hiding their mutant abilities, or as it was called at the time, Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. Despite the name, Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters was far more than an accredited learning institution. Its slogan hinted at the true goal of the X-Men, Mutatis Mutandis, or changing only those things which need to be changed, starting with the powerful psychic Jean Grey, then known as Marvel Girl, and soon adding Cyclops, Beast, Iceman, and Angel. Charles recruited students with uncanny abilities to teach them to control their powers to help humans and mutants alike. Soon, these gifted youngsters would go by another name, the X-Men, which is great branding work on Charles's part. Also, it was better, in the long run, than another term they were saddled with at first, the most unusual teenagers of all time. The above-ground floors of the facility were spacious and luxurious, giving plenty of room for offices, classrooms, and one particularly homey kitchen. These floors provided students with the space, sunlight, and quiet they needed to focus their learning and enhance their minds. Not for nothing, these floors also provided a bit of a nicer front to show those who might not entirely trust mutant kind. Initially just a stately mansion with normal rooms, the building would gradually become one of the most advanced facilities on Earth. Eventually, the fancy exterior came to hide incredible technology, much of which was obtained from the extraterrestrial Shi'ar Empire, which Xavier himself would become associated with for most of his adult life. I guess when you date an interstellar empress, you get home renovation work at a discount. Regardless, Xavier's mansion featured long-distance sensors to pick up on any approaching threats. Security was, understandably, a top priority for the mansion, and even the top floors could only be reached with the proper security pass. But it's below the surface of the X-Mansion where the real magic happened. And by magic, we mean science. And also sometimes magic. While originally just a basement with a gymnasium-type room filled with mechanical testing equipment, the underground portion of the mansion itself, too, transformed over time into a premier state-of-the-art facility. It was a multi-floor training and research complex with every feature you could possibly want. Access to these deeper levels could only be gained with a team member or by emergency computer decision. And just to make sure it all goes to plan, procedures for the basement facilities were psionically implanted in people's minds. So what exactly did this vast underground lab feature? Inside its adamantium doors with biomolecular locks, it had Cerebro, a powerful psionic device used to detect and communicate with other mutants across the globe, and which was originally just upstairs in Xavier's office. Think of it both as a microphone and a megaphone for psychic powers. The famous Danger Room, where the X-Men trained against, danger. This ain't just virtual reality. these threats are real. There was a war room with access to communications from around the globe, a med lab for all those battle injuries, an airplane hangar with the X-Men's special jet, the Blackbird. It was an advanced transonic jet stored in a hangar just a tram's ride away from the mansion's grounds. There were even passageways under the mansion that connected it to abandoned New York City tunnels and bomb shelters used by the outcast Morlocks 40 miles away. Really, it had it all. Even fun. Recreational facilities include everything from new movie releases from all over the galaxy to baseball. As with any home, Xavier did some redecorating of the facilities over the years. The danger room went from a training space with simple traps to using lasers to becoming a deadly sentient being. But the mansion needed to be flexible. Despite the fact that Xavier's mansion was packed with security features and had one of the most powerful teams on Earth living there, they were under constant attack from threats big and weird. To be fair, it does make a bit of sense when your headquarters is a somewhat well-known school address. The first time the X-Mansion was completely destroyed was in Uncanny X-Men number 154, during an attack by the Sidri. The Sidri are an extraterrestrial race of baddies that were hired by the Shi'ar, itself a spacefaring empire, to hunt Corsair, who, it turned out, also happens to be Cyclops' dad. It's a lot. Between Scott Summers' son Cable living in the future, his alternate reality daughter, his brother who dated the Queen of Limbo, his other brother who was the Emperor of Space, his alien half-brother on his mother's side, marrying his girlfriend's clone, his real wife dying and resurrecting multiple times, and his aforementioned dad, Corsair, also living in space, but as a pirate. Cyclops' family really gets around. Sadly, the team didn't have much time to celebrate Cyclops' family reunion. The Sidri were straight up flying through windows of the mansion and tearing up the place. The X-Men eventually won the day, but not before observing that their home had been obliterated. The X-Men would rebuild. Until then, they needed a new home. Magneto's Island, Bermuda Triangle. While the X-Men most famously stay at Xavier's mansion in upstate New York, sometimes they need to crash at someone else's home. Needing a base for himself, Magneto actually raised an island from the ocean floor using his powers, which, depending on who you ask, could be a good or a bad thing. On one hand, the island gave Magneto and later the X-Men a sanctuary to hide from the rest of the world. On the other hand, it appears the island may have a little bit of eldritch history with ancient dead gods. They can return to unleash horrors upon the world. Dark, magical energy permeates the island. As you can imagine, the X-Men weren't necessarily thrilled to be there. This place had been home base for their greatest enemies, and not for nothing, those ancient gods are also a massive threat to the cosmos. Fortunately, a combination of technology and magic made this base harder to detect, giving the X-Men a little bit of breathing room as Xavier's mansion was reconstructed. Then again, if you're gonna cool your heels for a while in someone's evil secret lair, you could do a lot worse than the Bermuda Triangle. X-Mansion, Westchester, New York, second time. While island life can be great, the X-Men also spent some time out in space and really missed their home. Fortunately, while they were away, the Shi'ar helped to rebuild the mansion. Salem Center, New York's most exciting residents were back home where they belong. And once again, the mansion became a place where mutants could come together for something as small as a birthday or to some of their biggest personal victories. Like when Cyclops married Madeline Pryor, a woman with a startling resemblance to his believed dead previous girlfriend, Jean Grey. And then, after realizing Maddie was a clone who tried to bring hell upon the Earth, they had, let's call it, an annulment. Fortunately, he later married the real Jean Grey. Apparently, Scott Summers has a type, and that type is Jean Grey. Aw, Wolverine. Sorry, bub. The new mansion was also a chance for the X-Men to diversify their portfolio of super teams. As the original X-Men team aged and went about their various lives, new mutants began joining Xavier's school. What were these new mutants called? Why, the New Mutants, of course. Rather than calling themselves the Old Mutants, the X-Men just stuck with the X-Men. That is, until Professor Xavier, after being near fatally wounded, needed an extended vacation in space with his humanoid bird person space empress girlfriend, Lalandra. He left the mansion in the care of his best frenemy, Magneto. Between new young students running around, an ever-changing core team, and a former nemesis becoming their new boss, the original X-Men had all gone their own ways. Oh, but then those original 5 X-Men became a new mutant super team, X-Factor. It's a long story, but come on folks, we know they're all still X-Men. Things weren't working out for everyone in upstate New York, so the X-Men, New Mutants, and X-Factor went their separate ways, taking refuge in sites around the globe. To be honest, there is a lot of going their separate ways with the X-Men. There might be no place like home, but there are a lot of places to hide when your home is always in danger of exploding. Reaver's Base, Northern Territory, Australia. After being killed while saving the world, a classic mutant move, the X-Men were revived by the goddess Roma, after which the mutants found their way to Australia. Not just any place in Australia, Cooterman's Creek. This was an abandoned mining town meant to disguise an advanced facility that was apparently built by the evil cyborg Reavers, who the X-Men stole the town from. Not that they wanted to stay there forever, though the X-Men briefly traveled to the States. Unfortunately, Mr. Sinister destroyed the X-Mansion again, so it was back to Cooterman's Creek. When the X-Men took the town from the cybernetic pirates and claimed the high-tech facility for themselves, the Desert Rose Hotel became the place where the team got to relax. Believe it or not, each of these buildings in Cooterman's Creek are connected via underground tunnels. These tunnels lead to everything from massive vaults filled with treasures stolen by the Reavers to a beautiful underground lake. It's deep into these tunnels past dark hallways that the X-Men found the command center, which itself had a computer so powerful that nobody seemed quite sure what to do with it. And all of this was protected by automatic weapons and a series of landmines planted around the town itself. With advanced technology, the magic of the goddess, and the help of Gateway, a local mutant with excellent teleportation powers, the X-Men were once again able to travel the world and fight evil. But the Reavers weren't ready to hang it up yet. The two groups had a few back and forths, ending with the Reavers retaking Cooterman's Creek while the X-Men were away. And when Wolverine came back to find his team, the Reavers crucified him, which honestly seems like taking things a bit too far. Don't worry, it's Logan. He always turns out fine. See? He's alright. Despite the many battles and brutal punishments, the X-Men occasionally returned to Cooterman's Creek, albeit not always by choice, such as when Cyclops once crash-landed in the Australian Outback and had almost nowhere else to go. Muir Island, off the coast of Scotland. On the bright side, the X-Men do have some friendly places with some usually friendly faces, such as Muir Island. That is, if you can find Muir Island. Unlike the X-Mansion, it doesn't necessarily advertise its presence to the world. It's north of Scotland and south of the Arctic Circle. So if you pull up a map of the world, you'll find that Muir Island is located essentially in the middle of nowhere. However, the remote location of Muir Island makes it the perfect place to hold the Mutant Research Center founded by Dr. Moira McTaggart, an expert on mutant genetics. Like most characters in the X-Men mythos, Dr. McTaggart is far more than she appears. While she initially founded the facility to help dangerous mutants like her son, Proteus, Dr. McTaggart herself also later turned out to be a mutant with the power to be reborn at the beginning of her life with all the memories she gained the last go-around. It causes her a lot of life drama, but you can probably understand why studying the mutant gene was so important to her. The research facility has been vital to fighting the mutant cause, including Dr. McTaggart's research towards the deadly legacy virus, a plague which wiped out hundreds of mutants. Unfortunately, having the largest mutant research center on Earth also made Muir Island a magnet for villains like, well, Magneto. If the X-Men love it, you can bet Magneto has tried to ruin it for everybody. At one point, even our old friends the Reavers made an assault on the island, leading to the mutants Forge and Banshee to help Moira form a team to push them back. That team, the Muir Island X-Men, got more than they bargained for when they realized the residents of the island were being manipulated by the Shadow King. After a lot of fighting and even more tragedy, the Shadow King was defeated and the Muir Island X-Men went their, you guessed it, separate ways. The good news is, after the Shadow King's defeat, the Mutant Research Center was rebuilt. The bad news is that it was later once again destroyed by Mystique. This is how you know Moira McTaggart is a mutant. Her place keeps getting blown up. X-Mansion, Westchester, New York. Third time. After Professor Xavier returned to Earth and helped rescue everyone on Muir Island, he and the X-Men rebuilt his famous mansion. Seeing the dangers faced by his students, Xavier had Forge give the school even more technological wonders, including big upgrades to Cerebro and the Danger Room. In fact, the new Danger Room was so advanced that it actually eventually became self-aware. While he wasn't necessarily cool with it, Professor Xavier at the very least let it slide for a little while and kept its sentience a secret because, hey, a good Danger Room is hard to find. That said, it was also becoming a bit clear that Professor Xavier's mansion wasn't necessarily the best place for children. While it had been long known as the school for gifted youngsters, the X-Mansion had been constantly under attack and now had a sentient room of death. So, you know, a bit of a split was in order. Charles passed the formal name of his school to Emma Frost, who opened a new facility in Massachusetts to train the next generation of mutants who were known as Generation X. Meanwhile, Charles's ancestral home was now known as the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning, although that learning part was a little loose. The X-Mansion once again became the home base of the X-Men, but even with all its enhancements, Xavier's estate still wasn't completely safe. During Operation Zero Tolerance, the villain Bastion systematically manipulated the world into trying to destroy all mutants. This, of course, included Bastion taking Professor Xavier's mansion and all the secrets within it. While Cable tried his best to get the files first and destroy the computer system, Bastion announced he had already had all the information he needed and left the facility completely stripped and raided. Don't worry. After some battles with the X-Men, X-Force, and Generation X, and some government intervention, Bastion surrendered, and the mansion persisted. After being fixed up by the X-Men again, the Institute built an X-shaped dormitory and began enrolling students again. They also added even more upgrades, including a replacement for Cerebro. Cerebra. What happened to Cerebro? Well, like we said, machines in Professor Xavier's mansion like to take on a life of their own. Life at the school returned to normal, or at least for some of the X-Men. Storm's extreme X-Men remained mobile and never stayed in the same place too long. But at least at home, bright-eyed mutant students were learning again. And just like a regular school, the X-Mansion had, among other things, protests, student revolts, and the occasional evil teacher. There was also massive chaos and destruction by Charles Xavier's also mega-powerfully psychic evil sister, Cassandra Nova, more Shi'ar shenanigans, loads of leather, murder in the mansion, the aforementioned student revolts, and Magneto bringing down the house again. Or so we thought. In reality, it was another villain disguised as Magneto. Maybe we blame that guy too much. But either way, the X-Mansion, yep, she was no more. And as always, the X-Men rebuilt the mansion. Again, if you're a building contractor in upstate New York, you are definitely rich. While Professor Xavier left to help the recovery of the mutant nation of Genosha, Cyclops and Emma Frost took over the school and both rebuilt and expanded its facilities. Students were once again trained by the members of the X-Men, and everything seemed like it was going to be okay forever. Then again, this was also around the time that the Danger Room fully revealed it was sentient, so maybe okay isn't the right word. More like the X-Men kept on keeping on. Unfortunately, a Danger Room wasn't even the team's biggest worry. On an M-Day that will live in infamy, the powerful Scarlet Witch whispered, "No more mutants," and stripped over 90% of mutants of their powers. In an instant, the Institute's mutant student body dropped from hundreds to just over 24. Unfortunately, when the X-Men tried to help the students who'd lost their powers leave the school, it ended in tragedy with anti-mutant terrorists killing 42 of them in a bombing. Between these attacks and the mutants hiding out in the mansion, the government decided to step in and surrounded the facility with Sentinels. Xavier's mansion, once the safest place on Earth to be a mutant, was now more or less a prison for them. Still, they didn't give up. Some of the students who were still mutants and left behind formed the new X-Men team. Some students even got creative, such as when the mutant Prodigy built a new, slightly less deadly version of the Danger Room in a cave beneath the mansion. But times remained hard with battle after battle after battle around the mansion, until the core X-Men group finally decided to take a brief break and move to San Francisco. Graymalkin Industries, San Francisco. The X-Men's first stop in California this time was Graymalkin Industries, the secret name for the X-Men's new headquarters. With the financial help of OG X-Man and wealthy playboy Warren Worthington III, aka Angel, aka Archangel, the X-Men were able to build new underground facilities with many of the same great features we all know and love, like Cerebra and the Danger Room, now with less threat of either becoming sentient and mucking up the place. In fact, the majority of the remaining mutants moved to San Francisco at this time, hoping this would once and for all be a place they could be accepted for who they are. And that's exactly what happened. No, just kidding. People got really mad again. Not learning their lesson from the many times they turned on the mutants in the past, the public had turned on the mutants once again. The mutant-hating Simon Trask introduced Proposition X, which intended to keep anyone with the X gene from having children. Soon, the growing anti-mutant sentiment led to the outbreak of riots, especially in San Francisco. Chaos ensued, and as the riots grew, mutant began to turn against mutant. Cyclops decided to move the X-Men to an even more surprising location, Magneto's former orbital base, now on Earth, Asteroid M, or as it would soon be called, the island of Utopia. Angel's Aerie, Colorado Rockies. But before we talk about Utopia, and kind of at the same time that was all happening, Cyclops and Wolverine formed their own secret team. This one was an Angel's Aerie, a luxurious ski cabin in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. But like many expensive things in the X-Men universe, this gorgeous hideaway is owned by old Moneybags Worthington. The dude is loaded. While Angel's Aerie had been used as both a personal getaway and the base for the Defenders in the past, Cyclops and Wolverine made it the new headquarters for the X-Men's Black Ops Strike Force, also known as X-Force. From here, they could monitor the rising anti-mutant sentiment and hopefully fight back. As you might expect, Angel's Aerie wouldn't be heaven for very long. Cyclops and the gang always bring trouble with them. Angel's Aerie was nearly destroyed, and soon another X team needed another X home. Utopia, off the coast of San Francisco. All the way back in the original X-Men number 5, we saw Magneto's orbiting base, Asteroid M. Like the X-Mansion, it was a high-tech facility meant to support a team of mutants. Unfortunately, the team it was originally supporting was Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. You gotta love that the evil mutants used to hide out in space, while the good mutants used to be like, we'll just use a house. Either way, during a battle with the X-Men, someone accidentally triggered the self-destruct button of the orbiting station. Asteroid M fell to Earth. Following the dangerous anti-mutant riots in San Francisco, Cyclops knew they had to move away from their secret Graymalkin Industries base, which was never really kept that well as a secret. Along with a team of hyper-intelligent mutants called the X-Club, Cyclops raised Asteroid M from the bottom of the ocean and turned it into a new home for mutants, this time outside the jurisdiction of the American government. Perhaps this island off the coast of San Francisco could be a mutant utopia. So they called it, you guessed it, Utopia. And nothing named Utopia can ever go wrong. Of course, starting a sovereign nation on an artificial island has its fair share of difficulties. Being a former asteroid, the island was largely made of metal and, as metal tends to do, started sinking. This required the work of enemy-turned-frenemy Magneto, who, to his credit, had to put in a massive effort into holding the mutant home afloat. Eventually, Magneto made a deal with Namor the Submariner, himself a mutant, to keep the island afloat by building a giant underwater pillar that itself would become New Atlantis. Keeping the island above the ocean wasn't the only issue. Don't forget, they were on a large rock in the middle of the ocean. They couldn't necessarily order delivery, and younger mutants began learning how to farm. Eventually, a supply line from the mainland was set up so the mutants could focus on more pressing matters, like how many times they were going to get attacked. In fact, as we've seen before, and we'll see again, keeping a lot of mutants on one small island isn't always the best idea for safety. The villain Loeb sent a group of Predator X's to the island, and if you're wondering, Predator X's are genetically engineered mutant animal hybrids with sharp teeth, even sharper claws, and a thirst for mutant blood. They're not great, and when those Predator X's didn't work out, Loeb released a deadly virus. He didn't really like the mutants. Utopia also faced attacks from undead monsters, upgraded Sentinels, other undead monsters, and eventually, an even bigger upgraded Sentinel who almost obliterated the place. After they disagreed on basically everything, Cyclops and Wolverine broke up the band, with half of the X-Men staying on Utopia and half going their separate ways. The X-Men love a messy breakup. And even then, Utopia's troubles were far from over. A conflict between the Avengers and the X-Men broke into all-out war on Utopia and around the world. This itself led to the Phoenix Force being split between 5 different X-Men, who used their new powers to raise Utopia into the sky as a shining beacon of mutant hope. That is, until the Phoenix Force-possessed Cyclops killed Professor X. It also didn't help that those 5 mutants began to lose their Phoenix powers, as well as Utopia crashing back into the water and sinking once more. Jean Grey School for Higher Learning, Westchester, New York. After his split from Cyclops, who we'll get to in a second, Wolverine brought his portion of X students back to good old Salem Center, New York. On the site of the previous X-Mansion, Wolverine announced the opening of the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning in honor of the sadly now dead Jean Grey. Although by now, we all know you can't keep a good Phoenix down. Along with Kitty Pryde, Wolverine returned the school to its roots as an actual teaching institution rather than military training facility. Crazy, right? That's not to say the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning didn't have some cool features. Beast updated and upgraded the tech once again, including the ability to generate its own electricity and grow its own food. While Wolverine and friends fostered some new young talent, it wasn't long before this group was forced to move on again. New Xavier School for Mutants, Alberta, Canada. But not every mutant wanted things to just go back to the way they were. Following the X-Men's battle with the Avengers, Cyclops was on the run, and kind of upset about the state of everything. Wanting to fight back, Cyclops teamed up with Magneto, Magic, and others, including Danger, the sentient Danger Room who was formerly hostile, but was now side by side with the X-Men. They launched a new revolutionary X-Men that would free and recruit imprisoned and persecuted mutants. And they'd do it from Alberta, Canada, in what was once the Weapon X facility. If you're not familiar, the Weapon X program was where the American and Canadian governments experimented on people and mutants to draw out latent powers. It's also where they bonded Wolverine to his famous adamantium skeleton, which by all accounts was not something he enjoyed. Now abandoned, Cyclops and his friends built a new secret school on this site. Because there's no better way to hide than to build your base in the exact spot 2 major governments focused all their attention. Either way, the school was dubbed the New Xavier School for Mutants. Wild. The dude kills his mentor and names the base after him. X-Men. Anyway, his new school featured many of the same wonderful toys that they had up in Westchester, including a danger room that hopefully wouldn't become self-aware and try to murder anyone. Unfortunately, if Cyclops could be pushy before, he was really bothering his colleagues now. Between students leaving the school and Cyclops falling out with some of the other grown-ups in the room, the Canadian version of Xavier's school was soon abandoned. X-Haven, Limbo. When the toxic condition Mpox began killing mutants across the globe due to clouds of Terrigen mist, be careful what you put in the atmosphere, Storm worked with Dr. Strange and others to move the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning to another plane of existence. Limbo. Limbo is a lovely dimension filled with demons, a place that had been the unwilling home of the mutant Magic for almost her entire childhood. But it's also one she has a deep connection to, as one does with childhood trauma, and is part of her ability to create portals through time and space. Still, Limbo might be a terrible place to grow up in, but it is a perfectly reasonable one to hide out in. The X-Men turned it into a haven for those with the X gene. They even called it X-Haven. Here, some lucky mutants were able to hide out from the Terrigen Mist Plague. Of course, nothing is ever completely safe. The X-Men in X-Haven still had their demons to fight, especially literal demons. Once the danger of Mpox had dispersed, Xavier's school was moved back to New York. Not to Westchester, to Central Park in Manhattan. Good luck to anyone who tried to mug those new residents. Xavier Institute for Mutant Education and Outreach, Central Park, New York City. They renamed the now New York City-based school/base/hideout to the Xavier Institute for Mutant Education and Outreach. Basically, if you got a degree from an Xavier school, the name on the certificate is going to always be out of date. Just because it was called the Xavier Institute for Mutant Education and Outreach doesn't mean every mutant was a fan of the place. In hopes of creating his idea of a perfect world, Nate Gray, a powerful mutant from another reality created using the genes of Cyclops and Jean Grey, created a team called the Horsemen of Salvation, and they destroyed this new facility. Well, them and the tax bill for the place. X-Mansion, Hightown Madripoor. To help him save the present, Beast brought the original 5 X-Men from their youth to the present day, including a younger version of himself. But despite their many battles, it appeared the time-displaced X-Men might never get back to the past, which, all things considered, could cause a lot of problems for the future. Thus, they teamed up with Magneto, again, in a new X-Mansion on the island of Madripoor. Madripoor is the type of place where you can make a few shady deals with no questions asked. This X-Mansion, too, was attacked by villains, such as the Goblin Queen, and destroyed by the new Marauders. And rebuilt. You know the drill. And yes, the time-displaced X-Men eventually got home. X-Lantis, undersea, Atlantic Ocean. As other mutants sought refuge in Antarctica and Limbo, Jean Grey, now back alive at this point, yay, decided to save people in a hideout down under the sea. I guess if living above the water hasn't worked, you might as well explore your options. She also decided it was time she got her own team. These X-Men were given refuge by Namor and his underwater kingdom. This little home away from home became known as X-Lantis. Because even when saving the world, the X-Men have strict brand guidelines. X-Lantis itself contained a version of Cerebro called, wait for it, Cerebro, which allowed Jean Grey to search the globe for threats while staying cool under the waves. Harry's Hideaway, Salem Center, New York. When the X-Men were believed dead, again, Cyclops and Wolverine gathered the remnants of the X-teams and decided to hole up in Harry's Hideaway, a bar near Xavier's old mansion in Salem Center, New York. The mutants have long hung out at Harry's Hideaway and used it as both a place to celebrate and, as the bar's name implies, hide away. Like many of the locations in the X-Men universe, Harry's Hideaway has plenty of features that help keep the team going. Okay, not a lot. Beast created a lab. But instead of a danger room, there are good vibes and Harry Morell. A man with absolutely no powers outside of the ability to keep people smiling. Honestly, Harry Morell might be the nicest human the mutants ever meet. But, as they say in the bars, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And this team needed a more permanent place to hang their hats and ruby quartz visors. Hatchi Towers, New York City. Needing somewhere a little safer and high-tech to keep the remnants of his X-Men, Cyclops moved his team to Hatchi Towers. Operated by the Hatchi Corporation and owned by Susan Hatchi, a mutant who lost her powers after M-Day. Here, Cyclops and his mutants cooled their heels as a big change loomed on the horizon. Krakoa, Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and elsewhere. Mutant kind has long sought a refuge from the hatred of humanity. They'd sought it through peace, which didn't quite work. They sought it on Genosha, which didn't quite work. And so they tried to find safety on Krakoa, an island nation made for and by mutants. Oh, and also, Krakoa is a living mutant island that walks like a man and feeds on mutant energy. To make a very long story short, the living island of Krakoa actually started as the living landmass of Okara. Okara, which itself had been the home to mutants thousands of years ago, was split in two to become the islands of Krakoa and Arakko. Over the years, the X-Men had faced off against Krakoa as an enemy, and the island itself, after being kidnapped off Earth, switched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And after the mutants faced extinction one too many times, Professor Xavier worked with Moira and Magneto to turn the island into a new country. Charles also used Cerebro to bring mutants to the island and worked with X-Men such as Cypher, Forge, Sage, Storm, and so many others to develop Krakoa into a safe haven for its new residents. Krakoa was not just another X-Men hideout. In fact, it was never technically an X-Men base for the core team, but the majority of your favorite world-saving mutants resided here at various times while serving with groups like Excalibur, the Marauders, and X-Force. Nor was it secluded. In fact, the flowers of Krakoa were able to grow into self-sustaining habitats and gateways. This allowed the residents of Krakoa to establish embassies everywhere, including on the Moon and Mars. And with the gateways, mutants and authorized humans could cross Earth and even the solar system in seconds. The Krakoans also developed resurrection protocols, bringing back untold scores of previously dead mutants, and made further designs on increasing the mutant populace. Really, Krakoa was a great place. Nothing X can stay peaceful for long, though. Battles for the island came to a head during the third Hellfire Gala, when Sentinels and Orcus made a surprise attack, creating yet another mutant massacre. Many mutants were able to escape through Krakoan flower gateways, only for most of those same gateways to lead to the White Hot Room, an afterlife-like dimension beyond time and space. His dream destroyed. Xavier was the last remaining mutant on Krakoa, at least for a little while. As they do, the mutants fought back and saved Krakoa. Sadly, though, to save the living island, they had to feed it that mutant energy it craves. Some mutants sacrificed themselves for the cause and kept this strange island afloat, so to speak. Revived, and with its enemies vanquished, Krakoa moved itself, and a great many mutants, to the White Hot Room to finally live in peace. Treehouse, Central Park, New York City. Mutants are constantly in need of two things: good PR and a new headquarters. And they found one of their more ecological home bases during the Krakoan Age in a giant treehouse in New York City's Central Park. Originating as a small Krakoan tree, Forge cultivated the plant, and Tempo used her ability to control the flow of time to grow it into a massive structure rivaling Avengers Tower for coolest building in New York. And despite its name, the treehouse was more than just a fun little hangout. This was a completely operational base, up to and including a hangar for their jet, the Thunderbird. And since it's built on prime real estate, thanks to Emma Frost's bank account, the treehouse was also part of a lush garden that celebrated mutant kind and their achievements. This was a chance for the X-Men to once again prove they're the good guys. It was the treehouse's connection to Krakoa that would be its downfall. During the Hellfire Gala attack on the island, an Orcus soldier was able to gain access to the treehouse. In the ensuing battle, this incredible green structure was lit on fire and destroyed. Morlock Tunnels, beneath New York City. As the Krakoan Age went from a celebration to a tragedy, some of the X-Men decided to regroup and hole up far from prying eyes. And there's nowhere better than the sewers, but they weren't the first to make it their home. Whether it be due to temperament or extreme physical mutations, the Morlocks stay out of sight, often only working with teams like the X-Men when danger presents itself. And there was no danger greater than Orcus, as they hunted mutants across the Earth. By this point, the Morlocks had moved on to greener and less sewersy pastures with Krakoa and Krakoan-sponsored situations, so the Morlock Tunnels thus became a hideout for the X-Men, and a few non-mutant guests, including Iron Man, who felt pretty guilty that his tech had found its way into mutant-hunting robots. Sure, Orcus may have been searching high and low for the X-Men, but some folks, like Wolverine, kept mutants pretty safe, if not completely clean. After all the bloodshed and loss of Krakoa, the X-Men were seemingly no more. But, as they always do, the X-Men rose from the ashes. Former Sentinel factory, Muir, Alaska. After Cyclops sued the United States for their role in the various recent mutant tragedies, including his wife Jean's death at the Hellfire Gala, the government settled and gave the X-Men a doozy of a new home base, a former Sentinel factory in Muir, Alaska. That's right, they used to make the Sentinels there. But Cyclops, along with Beast, Magneto, Magic, and even Juggernaut, among others, were able to convert the facility into something livable, including their own garden that grew crops, and a medical bay that helped sick and injured mutants, and an airship called the Marauder that could fire Juggernaut like a bullet, and the world's last Cerebro. Despite the settlement, the government seems like they're still worried that Cyclops and his team might turn against humanity. Haven House, Haven, Louisiana. Helpless and unable to save a young, terminally ill mutant who was also an X-Men superfan, grief enveloped Rogue and some of her reunited fellow former X-Men. It seemed like there was no hope left and nowhere else to turn. Fortunately, Rogue's true love, Gambit, had a place to stash the team, in a hideaway in Louisiana called Haven. Like Cyclops, Rogue decided she needed to bring the X-Men back, and not a moment too soon, because new young mutants were already showing up. And if that wasn't enough stress, the X-Mansion and Salem Center, abandoned at the beginning of Krakoa, had been turned into a nasty mutant prison called Graymalkin by Dr. Karina Ellis. Former dance studio, Chicago, Illinois. Not every X-Man just wants to move to another base. Struggling with actions she had to take to protect mutant kind from Orcus, Kitty Pryde moved to her native city of Chicago to live a normal life. But her human life fantasy ended when she had to save a young mutant from being killed. If that wasn't enough, Emma Frost also just moved to Chicago, and she's putting together a new team. And they made their new base in a disused converted dance studio, which honestly is even cooler than having your base on an asteroid. Bonus: X-Men 97, X-Mansion, Genosha, and beyond. While the X-Men of Marvel Comics have planted their flags far and wide, the X-Men of Marvel Animation's X-Men 97 on Disney Plus have mostly stayed in Westchester, but that isn't to say it's been an easy road. After Charles Xavier's public death, the X-Men were horrified to learn that Professor X's will actually gave the X-Mansion and his team to Magneto. To his credit, Magneto tried becoming a hero, but would humanity allow it? No. Meanwhile, Cyclops had to deal with learning he had a baby with the wrong Jean Grey. That is, her clone, Madeline Pryor. It wasn't easy for Jean Grey either, let alone the baby who'd been sent to the future to be cured of a techno-organic virus and become Cable. At the same time, Magneto and other mutant leaders turned the island of Genosha into a paradise. But the X-Men can never have it good for too long. The human-Sentinel hybrid Bastion sent massive Sentinels to attack Genosha, killing millions in the process, including Gambit, who died heroically trying to prevent further death. Magneto got a little angry about this and used his powers to shut down the planet's electricity and bring back Asteroid M. He also brutally injured Wolverine by using his powers to rip out Logan's metal skeleton. Yeesh. To stop all this chaos, Xavier, who's actually alive, yay, briefly took over Magneto's brain in time to beat the crap out of Bastion and, eventually, defeat him. Speaking of time, the fight wasn't without consequences. The explosion from Asteroid M sent Cyclops and Jean careening almost 2,000 years into the future, while Xavier, Magneto, Rogue, Nightcrawler, and Beast ended up in ancient Egypt. As for Wolverine, well, he had to stay in bed. Even with a healing factor, the man needed a minute. And that is our abridged summary of 60-plus years of X-Men locations and headquarters. Want to learn more? Sign up for Marvel Unlimited to access decades of incredible X-Men and Marvel comics. Want to find out what's next? Read current issues of X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and Exceptional X-Men on Marvel Unlimited, and available where your favorite comics are sold. And watch X-Men 97 on Disney Plus. If anything, just watch for that Gambit shirt. We had to include it again. This has been Marvel Recap X-Men Headquarters.